Chapter 12 of Part 1 of the Lives of the Three Misses Judsons, by Arabella M. Wilson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 12. Mr. and Mrs. Judson visit Bengal and return. Mrs. Judson's health again fails. Her resolution to visit America. Her voyage to England and visit there. They arrived in Calcutta on the 8th of August, 1820. The voyage was of no essential benefit to Mrs. J.'s health, neither was her visit to Calcutta, but at Serampore she so far recovered as to make them desirous to return to Rangoon, where they arrived on the 5th of January, 1821. The converts received them with the utmost affection. Their old friend, the Vicereine, again occupied her former palace, and welcomed Mrs. Judson with friendly familiarity, and new inquirers presented themselves at the Zayat. In translating the Scriptures, the acute and fertile mind of Mounshang Yong was an invaluable assistance, while another convert of cultivated intellect was equally useful in other missionary labors. Though through fear of being subjected to exhortation, some of them had been obliged to flee to the woods, not one disciple had disgraced or dishonored his profession. A violent effort had been made by some of Mounshang Yong's enemies to ruin him in the opinion of the Viceroy, by complaining of him that he was making every endeavor to turn the priest's rice pot bottom upwards. "What consequence?" said the Viceroy. "Let the priest turn it back again." All the disciples from that time felt sure of the toleration under Mai Daimen, the name of the Viceroy. The history of the next few months presents nothing novel in the life of this little Christian community, to which there were, however, some accessions. But Mrs. Judson was gradually sinking under the disease which had so long troubled her, until at length it was found essential to her life even, that she should seek some more propitious climate. After much anxious deliberation, it was resolved that she should sail for Bengal, and thence to America. Her feelings on leaving the home of her heart and the husband of her youth, as well as the spiritual children that God had given them in the heathen land, to try alone the perils of a long tedious voyage, in a state of health which rendered it doubtful whether she would ever reach the land of her nativity, or return to that of her adoption, can scarcely be conceived, much less described. Here her own words are: "To those who have been through a variety of toil and privation to obtain a darling object, can realize how entirely every fibre of the heart adheres to that object when secured. Had we encountered no difficulties, and suffered no privations in our attempts to form a Church of Christ, under the government of a heathen despot, we should have been warmly attached to the individuals composing it, but should not have felt that tender solicitude and anxious affection as the present case. Rangoon, from having been in the theatre in which so much of the power, faithfulness, and mercy of God have been exhibited, from having been considered for 10 years past as my home for life, and from 1,000 interesting associations, had become the dearest spot on earth. Hence you will readily imagine that no ordinary consideration would have induced my departure. She arrived in Calcutta September 22nd, 1821, finding when she reached there that the American captains of vessels declined taking passengers without an exorbitant price. She decided not to take passage to America. On mentioning her circumstances to a lady in Calcutta, the latter strongly recommended the advantages of a voyage to England, on account of the superior accommodations, medical advice, and female passengers in English ships. A pious captain offered to take her for about one-third of the price demanded for a voyage to America, provided she would share a cabin with 3 children who were going to England, an offer which she immediately accepted. The father of the children subsequently arrived in Calcutta, and generously paid the whole price of the cabin, which enabled her to go without any expense to the board. She writes, "If the pain in my side is entirely removed while on my passage to Europe, I shall return to India in the same ship, and proceed immediately to Rangoon. But if not, I shall go over to America, and spend one winter in my dear native country. Ardently as I desire to see my beloved friends in America, I cannot prevail on myself to be any longer from Rangoon than is absolutely necessary for the preservation of my life. I have had severe struggle relative to my immediate return to Rangoon, instead of going to England, but I did not venture to go contrary to the convictions of reason, to the opinion of that eminent and skilful physician, and the repeated injunctions of Mr. Judson. My last letter from Rangoon was dated October 26th. Mong Shong Yong had been accused before the Viceroy, and had disappeared. Mr. Judson had felt much anxiety and distress on his account, fearing that he had done in some way of retraction, which prevented his visiting him, but in a fortnight he was agreeably surprised at seeing him enter. He informed Mr. J. that having been accused, he had thought it the wisest way to keep out of sight, that he had put all his family on board a boat, and was going up to the country among the sect of the heretics, with whom he once associated, and had now come to take leave, obtain tracts, gospels, etc. Mr. Judson furnished him with what was necessary, and bid him Godspeed. He will no doubt do much good among that class of people, for it is impossible for him to be any time with his friends without conversing on the subject of religion." Moung Ying had returned as steadfast and much devoted to the cause as ever. He and Moung Shao Ba spent every evening in reading the Scriptures, and finding the places where the apostles preached, on a map which Mr. Judson had made for them. Another Burman has been baptized, who gives decided evidence of being a true Christian. Have we not, my dear sir, every reason to trust God in future, when we see what he has done in Rangoon? Could you see at once the difficulties in the way of the conversion of the Burmans, the grace of God would appear 10 times as conspicuous as it does now, when we hardly ventured to hope that we should ever see one of them truly converted. How great is our joy to see a little church rise up in the midst of that wilderness, consisting of 13 converted Burmans. On her passage to England, her old enemy, the liver complaint, again attacked her, but bodily illness did not prevent her from endeavoring to benefit the souls of her fellow passengers, and with regard to 2 of them, her efforts did not seem unsuccessful. On arriving in England, she was cordially invited by the Hon. Joseph Butterworth, M.P., to make his house her home. He afterward, at a public meeting, referred to her visiting as reminding him of the apostolic admonition, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." At his house she met many persons distinguished for literature and piety, among whom were Sumner, Babington, and Wilberforce. After spending some time at Cheltenham, to which place she had been sent for the benefit of its waters, she accepted a pressing invitation to visit Scotland, where, as in England, she received valuable presents and innumerable acts of kindness. The piety of her English friends seemed to her of the most high-toned character, and their ardent friendship called forth her warmest affections. Though on her way to a still dearer country, the land of her birth, she could not part with them without tenderest regret. CHAPTER 13.